All right, so the staffing company in the system is going to have obviously access to all open job orders that their company matches against. So for instance, if a staffing company is only IT specific, then they're going to be put into the system as a supplier of IT candidates. If they do IT and accounting and finance, they're going to be an IT and accounting and finance company. So if the client is looking for all disciplines across the board, be it IT, accounting and finance, healthcare, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever that company designates as their primary focus in recruiting is how they're going to be cataloged in the system. When a requirement comes out, and let me back up. If they're a staffing company that fills all needs, like Symbiotic Services fills 100% of what's out there, maybe with some exceptions like light industrial, it gets all job orders if they're on the tier 1 staffing list. Okay, if they're not tier 1 because they're a specialty staffing company, they would get requirements that are released that's tier 1 and specialty. So if they're IT only, but they're not tier 1, and an IT requisition comes out, they're going to get that released to them so that the client has maximum exposure against their open requirements. So anybody that's a specialty staffing firm is going to be treated the same as a tier 1 staffing firm, right, that recruits all disciplines. So if they are, again, back to the IT reference, if they're an IT staffing company only, they're going to be receiving the requirements just like a tier 1 company would. So the client will go into the system and create the job order, and the job order will be released based on those parameters that I gave you. So it'll first go out to tier 1 and specialty. So the tier 1 and the specialty staffing firms will get this. Now, over time, if we have 100 different staffing companies in there, we'll eventually have a tier 1, a tier 2, and then that specialty staffing. And the purpose of this is so that we can actually regulate some control within the organization where the client is receiving candidates, and we can also give opportunities for people that are on tier 2 to demonstrate their capabilities and be promoted one day into tier 1, and someone on tier 1 that's not supporting our clients, we can bump them down to tier 2. It's just all about having a mechanism in place to manage the flow of candidates. So if somebody starts slacking off or a company goes out of business, we'll be able to learn really quickly if that's a tier 1 company that's no longer supporting our clients' needs. So when a candidate presents, as I discussed in the last video, they're going to go in and they're going to put in a series of skill sets. And the more information that the candidate puts into the system from a skill set perspective is, so let's say this is IT and they're a Java developer, and they also have database experience, and let's say they also have let's say they also have architecture experience, and let's say they also have, whatever else they have, who cares? But the more skill sets that they have in here, now I would discourage a candidate, and maybe we limit this and we have to figure out the best mechanism for this, but they need to have perhaps a primary set of skill sets, and we'll call this, the primary block. And then they have a secondary block. And when the job order comes out, it'll have the primary block of skill sets that it's looking for from a candidate, and then these would be the secondary block, which may be nice to have. It'd be nice if this person had, database architecture experience, or it'd be nice if they had some other skill set that's not primary. So maybe we limit this to, 5 to 7 primary skill sets, and we can do, 5 secondary skill sets. And what this will do for us is allow a candidate that meets this on the job order. If they're 100%, this candidate will be at the top of the category as it relates to candidates being submitted against this job order, right? So, and then whatever percentage, let's say they're 80% of the secondary block, not as important, because the client says these are have to haves. This is nice to have. So if someone meets 100%, you're looking at the job order. So here's the job order, and then you've got candidate 1 is submitted over here. He meets 100% of the requirement. Candidate 2 meets 95%. Candidate 3 equals 80%. Anybody under 80% doesn't even appear. So candidate 4 through 10, they don't even appear on the list for the manager to see. If they're submitted against this requirement and they, are less than 80%, perhaps the system, and I'm kind of spitballing here a little bit, perhaps the system doesn't advance them unless we can determine that maybe they do have another skill set here, and that's something that the system will recognize as skill sets are put in by the candidate from a primary and secondary level, and then as the job order is put in by the client themselves. So, as simple as a law firm that wants to hire a typist. They need somebody to be able to type 60 to 80 words per minute. That's going to be one skill set. They need somebody that has legal background. That's going to be another skill set. They need somebody that's going to have experience with whatever discipline they are. Let's say it's a bankruptcy law firm, and they say they need to have experience in bankruptcy. So those are going to be the buttons on the primary skill set. And then secondary, we'd like for them to be 3 years or more out of their, program, have a, some sort of typing certification, paralegal certification, whatever they may be looking for. They're not as important, but they're nice to have. Window dressing, if you will. So the as this piece is considered in the system, I know this is a lot of information that marries these two together. Getting back to the candidate and the conversation that I had with the team this morning was that every candidate, when they enter their information into the system, is going to show up on the dashboard as a hot candidate, okay? But they're only a hot candidate if they are meeting or exceeding the percentile match that we designate. And let's just say that that's greater than 75% match. And again, these are numbers that we can play with here. Nothing is in stone. But if they're greater than 75%, every recruiter that represents that open job, that candidate shows up on their dashboard. And so under the hot candidate list, if I'm assigned inside of Staff Elements, I'm the recruiter that's working on job order 1234. When job order 1234 is released, it's assigned to me as the recruiter in the company, in the staffing company I'm working for. So the staffing company super user, for lack of better definition, or administrator that's going to manage the flow in their office says everything coming from client A is going to be released to Shane. Well, every job order that comes out and every candidate that's in the system that meets a percentile greater than, say, 75% is going to show up immediately on my dashboard as a hot candidate. So I don't even have to go in and do a whole lot of searching in the database for a candidate that matches my open requirement, okay? So it will cut down and create a lot of speeds and efficiencies, and there will be a lot less drag as it relates to going into the system, putting in some keyword searches, and finding the right applicant. The right applicant may show up on my dashboard immediately. Now, the key, however, is every staffing company out there that is working on that job requisition, whether it's 10 staffing companies or 100 staffing companies, when that candidate puts their information in there, matches this skill set, puts whatever their secondary skill set in, and they hit this greater than 75 percentile, they're gonna be on every dashboard. So when I, as a recruiter, identify that candidate, and like he or she pops up on my dashboard, I need to be on the phone, or I need to be communicating through our chat bot, or I need to be texting that candidate immediately to get authorization to submit them. Now, once a staffing company has established the relationship with the candidate, and the candidate has authorized Shane Sharp with Symbiotic Services to represent them for job order 1234, that candidate drops off of every dashboard as a hot candidate. Okay, so as soon as that acknowledgement is made from the candidate to the staffing company for this job order, they immediately come off that hot dashboard. So it's the first recruiter in wins. It's just like a submittal. When this candidate is then submitted against that job requisition, nobody else can submit them against that job requisition. Okay. Can't remember, I just lost my train of thought. So that's awesome. I love that I'm recording live. One of the other things that we talked about this morning on the call was candidates being submitted across multiple job orders by either the same staffing company or by multiple staffing companies to either the same client or multiple clients. The relationship of the candidate to the job order to the client is always going to be the first one in. So if that candidate is identified by staffing company number one, submitted to job order A, and the client requests to interview and ultimately hires them, then that's how the process would look in a static environment. But there's always variables, right? So candidate puts their information into the system, but there's 3 jobs that they fit. Staffing company 1 matches them to a job, staffing company 2 matches them to a second job, staffing company 3 can match them to a third job. So as long as there's an open requisition that matches their skill set, which that's going to happen across the board hundreds and hundreds of times, that candidate only is locked as a candidate once they accept a position. So they're still very much live and capable of being engaged in every scenario that exists. But along the way, I believe that the staffing company that represents this candidate for position number 1, there needs to be an indicator in here that the candidate is active on another open requirement that I haven't submitted them to. And that's something we're going to have to massage a little bit. But if the candidate's in active process of interviewing or accepting a job or actively being presented by a staffing company, I think there should be some indicator to help those of us that are trying to work with them on another open position knows that they're actively engaged, right? But that's a bridge we can cross at another time. Now, another thing that is going to be important is the staging process as it relates to this candidate and a job order, okay? Candidate submitted against a job order just means they're in the submittal status, right? They haven't interviewed, they haven't accepted the job, they haven't been offered the job. So we will, if a candidate is in an active submittal process, I think that is something that needs to be known across the platform. If they're in the interview process, it needs to be known across the platform. And if they're in negotiations for the position. They need to be, needs to be known across the platform. Now, let's talk about a job offer. Candidate matches the skill sets, connects to the job by the staffing company. Now we get to an offer. The inside of the system, there needs to be a window of time that is allocated for an offer to be accepted or declined. Because, like I said, that candidate could be working with multiple staffing companies, and while working with multiple staffing companies within the system across either multiple clients or the same client, there needs to be a component in there that forces the candidate to move, make a decision, accept the job, decline the job, and if another offer comes through, that clock doesn't necessarily get reset. It actually will speed up the clock to the time frame of the first offer. So if a candidate gets a job offer with opportunity A, they have 24 hours, and then later that same day, opportunity is presented by another staffing company for them to accept a position on another job requisition, it gives them the same expiration time. It doesn't add 6 or 8 more hours to the clock. So a decision has to be made and come to close in that 24-hour window. So that's going to take some massaging, but I think another element to the job offer is the candidate needs to have the ability to negotiate. So the candidate, what I think there should be, and again, we'll talk about this. So when an offer is made to a candidate, they have a negotiate button, okay? Because they got another job offer for $3 an hour more from a different client, but in the but in the Staff Element system. So they got the negotiate button that lets them know, hey, I got another opportunity presented to me. It's $3 more an hour. I'd like to know if this client would consider increasing it to $3 an hour. So there's a negotiate button, then there's an accept button, and once the candidate's accepted, it takes the candidate back to their profile, and as I discussed yesterday, they'll upload their I-9 documentation, their supporting documentation for the I-9, the W-4 form. If there's a contract associated with the position, if there's any sort of non-circumvention, confidentiality, or non-disclosure agreement, all of that can be populated as soon as the offer is accepted. And then the candidate, starts their position. And one key piece that we discussed today is when the candidate accepts an offer and they're going to start, that window of time begins ticking from the start date. And if their contract is set to end 6 months from that date, then the staffing company that puts them on board, part of the onboarding process, you have to have that window of time. It has to populate. So you put a 6-month window of time in there in association with the contract that's going to be relative to what was put in the job order by the client themselves, is going to give that staffing company on their dashboard, they're going to be able to see people that are rolling off contract. So they can, and it's going to start at 35 days. And the reason why it's going to start at 35 days is because they're going to get a 5-day head start with other staffing companies before the candidate's information is released back into the system. And then that final 30 days of that candidate being on contract will be released back to the population, and everybody else's dashboard will pop up and it will say a candidate that matched one of your open requirements 6 months ago is rolling off contract. So there will be a piece to help people see on their dashboard live candidates inside of the database that are rolling off contract. So we know those people are going to be looking for another job. So that kind of sums it up for today, and we'll revisit with more questions after our next session.